Have you ever been reading the Bible and you hit a passage that just makes you stop and go, wait a second, doesn't that contradict something I read earlier? Well, today we are tackling a big one. Who actually gets saved? Is it this tiny, exclusive group, or is it a massive crowd so huge that nobody can even count it? There are a lot of ways to look at this, but let's unpack one really compelling argument that might just solve the whole puzzle.
All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to start by laying out the apparent contradiction. Then we'll go on a little treasure hunt back through the Old Testament to find a crucial pattern. We'll look at a powerful metaphor the prophets used, see how Jesus picks that exact theme up, and then, finally, we'll connect all the dots and watch the paradox just dissolve.
So first things first, let's get right to the heart of the puzzle. This is a question that's been debated for centuries, and it really boils down to two key statements that seem to be pulling in completely opposite directions. Okay, so on one hand, you have Jesus himself in the Gospel of Matthew saying that the gate to life is narrow, and only a few people are going to find it. But then you flip to the end of the Bible, to the book of Revelation, and the Apostle John sees a vision of a great multitude that no one could number standing before God. So which one is it? Few or uncountable? Right, how can both of these things possibly be true? Now, a common explanation you'll hear is that, well, even a huge number of people is still few compared to every single person who ever lived. But that feels a little unsatisfying, doesn't it? It kind of feels like a cheap way out that doesn't really get to the heart of the matter. I think to really crack this code, we have to realize the key isn't a simple numbers game. The real answer is found by looking backwards. Because when Jesus talks about the few, he's not just coming up with a new idea out of thin air. No, he's tapping into a really powerful theme that has been running through the entire history of Israel. So let's do it. Let's head back to the Old Testament. And as we start to trace this idea, you're going to see a very clear pattern emerge. And this pattern is absolutely essential for understanding what Jesus is really talking about. And the pattern is, well, it's incredibly consistent. Just look at this timeline. Way back in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, God warns Israel, if you're unfaithful, you will be left few in number. Then, fast forward hundreds of years, and what do the prophets like Isaiah and Jeremiah describe? Exactly that. A judgment comes and only a tiny group is left. Now, this small surviving group has a very specific name in the Bible. They're called the remnant. It's this core idea that after a big period of judgment, God always saves and preserves a small, faithful portion of his people. That word, remnant, you're going to want to hold on to that one. It's key. This brings us to a really powerful and honestly, a kind of terrifying image that the prophets use to talk about this coming judgment. And it's an image that gets picked up again right before Jesus even starts his ministry. The prophet Isaiah, when he's warning about an invasion, he describes the enemy army, Assyria, as an axe in God's hand. The idea is that God himself is using this foreign army to chop down the unfaithful nation of Israel like a forest, leaving only a few trees still standing. And here is where it gets really interesting. Hundreds of years go by, and then John the Baptist shows up on the scene. And what metaphor does he use to warn the religious leaders of his day? The exact same one. He says, the axe is laid at the root of the trees. He's signaling that a new judgment is about to fall on their generation of Israel. And all of this leads us directly to Jesus' own teachings. Because you see, his most severe warnings, the ones that sound the most exclusive, they weren't meant for all people and all times. They were aimed like a laser at a very specific audience in a very specific moment in history. The Gospel of Matthew actually goes to great lengths to show us this. It presents Jesus as the ultimate fulfillment of all of Israel's greatest heroes. He's a new and greater Moses, a new and greater David, and, critically for our puzzle, he's another Jeremiah, a prophet sent to warn the nation's leaders that a judgment, a desolation is coming. So here it is, the crucial point. When Jesus talks about the narrow gate and says that only a few will find it, he's standing in that long prophetic tradition. He's picking up John the Baptist's axe metaphor, and he's delivering a final urgent warning to that generation of Israel. And his parables just hammer this point home again and again. You know that famous line, many are called but few are chosen? Well, what's the context? Jesus says this directly to the religious leaders, right after telling a story where they are the invited guests who refuse to come to the king's party. The many who are called is the nation of Israel. The few who are chosen is that small remnant from within that nation who actually accept the invitation. So why? Why would only a few from that generation actually make it through the narrow gate? Well,
because they were trying to earn their way to God. They were trying to establish their own righteousness by following all the rules. And instead of accepting God's path of faith through Christ, they stumbled over him, the very person sent to save them. Okay, so we have followed all the clues, right? From the Old Testament pattern all the way through the teachings of Jesus. And this brings us to the final, and I think a very satisfying resolution to this whole puzzle. And here is where it all just clicks. The two statements aren't talking about the same group of people. Few will be saved is a very specific statement. It refers to the remnant of first-century Israel who accepted Jesus before that generation faced its judgment. But many will be saved. That refers to the total, global, uncountable number of believers from all nations across all of history. And just like that, the paradox is gone. It just dissolves. There is no contradiction here. The few who were saved from that one specific generation of Israel, they're simply the first members of that much larger, uncountable group of the many who will be saved throughout all of time. And it turns out, Jesus himself was teaching both of these ideas all along. He talked about this great many, saying that people would come streaming in from all over the world to join the kingdom of heaven, even while some of the original heirs would be left out. The few and the many, they were both part of his message from the start. So, if there's one big thing to take away from all of this, it's the incredible power of context. Just taking the time to understand who was speaking, who they were speaking to, and the larger historical story they were a part of, it can bring amazing clarity to passages that seem really confusing on the surface. And that really leaves us with a final question to think about. If understanding the original context can solve this ancient biblical puzzle so neatly, what other apparent contradictions or difficult ideas in history and literature, maybe even in our own lives, could suddenly become clear if we just took the time to understand the bigger story?